Hello, and welcome back to my video series showcasing M&T 2.0. I'm Demi and Sky. So we've officially been in development for more than a year for 2.0. We definitely didn't expect it to take this long because originally all we really wanted to do was put in population into the game, but the more we got into development, the more we realized that in order to actually have a balanced system, you couldn't just shove a bunch of population into the game and expect the game to be playable and balanced in any kind of form. And so we expanded on that concept considerably. And in this video, I'd like to actually take a little breather from the usual video schedule, and instead of introduce new features to you, I'd like to go over all the stuff that we've finished so far. And give you a brief summary of how all new features function and how they all fit together. So originally, like I said, the objective was to just put population in the game by replacing the various types of developments, replace them with different types of population. And so you can see the three types are the rural population, who live on farms, and a lot of them are involved. I'd say most in this era are involved with subsistence farming. Then you have urban population, and urban populations are more valuable in game term wise. They produce finished goods, and they tend to be, more of your intelligentsia and your merchants and things like that. And then you have the upper classes, who are at the tippity top and tend to be the people who are running and administering society. So your nobles, your mayors, your bureaucrats, your scholars, things like that. So it took about 4 months to finish all of the basic population related things. It took such a long time because, like I said, you can't just put basic population, geometric population growth mechanics into the game, because otherwise you would literally have 500 times more people in the game by game's end, 500 years in the future, if you actually just had simple mechanics like that. So instead, what I did was I appealed to a lot of different principles of ecology involving logistical growth and carrying capacity and things like that. And so in each province, there is basically a set amount of conceivably, potentially arable land. And at game start, a lot of that land isn't actually under cultivation at that moment and don't have people living on it. But the idea is that if you want to increase your population, you don't just need people to not die, and you don't just need people to be breeding, but you actually need to be bringing land under cultivation for people to live on. And so if there's tons and tons of people in a province, but you haven't brought much land under cultivation, then those people are kind of living in a marginal situation. They'll be prone to famine, and their population will be much lower because in reproductive endocrinology, when people eat less protein and they're not eating as often, they tend to be less fertile. And so so that's basically the principles from which population growth work off of as far as rural populations are concerned. Urban populations, they are actually living off of the excess food which is produced from the rural populations. And I'll get into that a little bit later when we get into the economic model that we've created for the game. But basically the idea is that when there's excess food, one of two things happens. Either rural people will change their behavior to produce rural goods, commodities, which can generate wealth and profit, or people can try to move to the cities and then make their fortunes there. And of course, if there is nothing at the city and there are no jobs, people don't move to the city. And so what you need in the city is various different types of infrastructure and development in order to attract people there. And the more attraction you have, the more opportunity that is in a city, the more people will try to move there, and the faster they'll move there as well. Those opportunities can range from urban production, producing special types of goods. They can go there for trade opportunities. They can go there because there is a demand for bureaucrats to help run a country and to run an empire. There's a lot of various reasons that people can move to a city. And it can be a mix of all those things as well. Like in Granada, you can see that it does production, it does trade. There's a local university here that attracts students. It's kind of a nice city. It has good urban infrastructure, so it makes it more hospitable. Road makes it easier to get to the city, so that improves, the urban draw. And it has a reputation as being an important center of trade, an important center of production, and it's the largest city on the subcontinent, so it has an enshrined reputation as a very formidable place to live. And so all of those things together attract people to live in Granada. And you can see in Almira, you can see the population data here and the expected growth data, and how saturated the populations are in that province. And so these numbers here are just for display only. We basically hijacked Paradox's interface, and all of these variables up here are actually contingent on variables that we calculated underneath the surface. I was actually going to show you really quickly some of the variables that we calculated. There's a tremendous amount of data in the population overhaul. And so you can see here in Granada, aside from flags or whatever, at the beginning of the game, these are all the various variables involved with wealth, city data, upper class composition, what's going on in the rural population, various growth modifiers, various food calculations. There's tons and tons of data, and then lots of other stuff being calculated to determine whether famines spring up and whether plague shows up. And these are about half the variables, actually more like a third of the variables that will be calculated in any given province. So there's a lot of data that other modders who want to manipulate the mod can work from. Anyway, that's population, and next we'll move on to the economic model that we've created. So now we've gone over the various checks and balances that keep population in check. It's obviously much more complicated than that, but I'm just giving you a very, very brief overview. Now we actually have an economic model to accompany population growth. And so you can see that you get a certain amount of base benefits from various types of population. However, your level of development is what ultimately determines how productive your society is at large. And there's numerous important variables which act as kinds of multipliers to the productivity of your people per capita. In real life, someone who lives in Liberia might only be perhaps 1/20th as productive as someone who is living in a developed country, and that's because the country is developed. It has lots of built-out infrastructure and things of that nature, which magnify the innate effort that a person can put out in their lifetime. And so we have the same thing in game. The foundation for your economic activity is what's known as farming efficiency. So each rural population produces enough food to support one person without any extra farming efficiency. And that one person they can support is themselves, right? It's pure subsistence farming. But their output is multiplied by the farming efficiency here. And so one rural person will be producing 1.35 pieces of food. So they can support more than just themselves. And those people who they support more than those extra people end up being people that go to cities. right? And so a city like Granada is relying on excess food throughout the region to support extra people in the city. And so in general, the more farming efficiency you have, the more you're able to support extra urban population or rural population who are producing goods for export or consumption. You can see farming efficiency can vary pretty dramatically from place to place. In this era, Eastern Europe was not nearly as developed, and so you can see that their farming efficiency is significantly worse than, say, Western Europe. And Italy, of course, has very formidable farming efficiency as well. Italy, modern day Belgium, and the Spanish Peninsula have pretty good farming efficiency. Now, aside from farming efficiency, you have different types of infrastructure. So there's rural infrastructure, and this is the type of infrastructure which magnifies the effectiveness of your rural population. This is harder to improve because in this era, not a lot of governments were going out and trying to improve farmland and stuff like that. They usually invested in major infrastructure projects. But then you also have urban infrastructure as well. And this is basically all of the various buildings that you're able to build, and most of which are all city related. And so there's actually some demographic data and some economic data you can access. And so, for instance, you can see the economic system works off of ducats or ducats or whatever the heck you call them. And in Europa Universalis Vanilla, the only ducats that existed were ducats that were in your treasury, right? But in MNT 2.0, there are ducats invested. There is the ducat equivalent value all over the place. And so, for instance, you have ducats in a province circulating in the economy, right, which represents effort that's waiting to be used. So, for instance, there's 380 ducats in Granada, most of which is in the city. There is ducats which are tied up in the actual infrastructure that exists in your country. So every time there's a building, that building actually represents a certain amount of value to your economy, right? So in Granada, you can see that there is over 3,000 ducats worth of urban infrastructure here. Each one of these, there are ducats bound up in each one of these buildings, which represent how advanced and how developed your country is. And then there is, oftentimes it's the lion's share, a tremendous amount of ducats rolled up in the value of your agricultural communities with your farming efficiency. So think of every country road, every fence, every water wheel, every canal, every barn, every windmill. Those are all, that's the value of your agricultural economy, right? And so the economy of Granada is very strong in this era per capita. The value of each citizen is 800 ducats, which can, of course, improve depending on player activity. When we go somewhere like, let's say we go to, let's go to England. You can see that the value of each individual citizen is substantially less. It's actually not a terribly bad value, but each citizen is worth about 106 ducats. And there's diminishing returns as far as how many how far extra ducats get you as far as the value of your economy. And so, for instance, a person in Granada is worth maybe 2.5 times more than someone in England, even though there's a difference in 800% as far as ducats are concerned, but the average person in Granada would be about 2.5 times more productive and useful, right? In real game terms, that would be like, an ability to field 2 times more soldiers per capita, right? I think it's the other places that are pretty undeveloped. You can see the value of each citizen is substantially lower. Okay, so what else we got here? Oh yeah, so there are lots of ways to improve your economy. Wealth, as it accumulates, you can see, aside from a province giving you income directly to your treasury, there's that money is actually based off of the economic potential of your entire country. And so the money you get tends to only be a tiny, tiny fraction of what's being generated in your economy. So if we go to Granada, we can see that even though we're getting about 1.72 ducats each month, we can see that a lot more ducats are being generated beyond simply what is going directly to your treasury. And that money stays in the local economy. It's used by your estates. It goes a lot of different places. And part of the point of the game is to try to get as much control over this private economy as possible and bring it to bear in productive ways. But even then, even if you were to, not try to tap local wealth at all, it would still end up accumulating to such a point where local powers would spend it to build a new building or something like that. So the economy improves without you having to directly go in and build something, even though you can. Okay, so like I said earlier, I'm kind of skimming through things. There's a lot more to the system than what I'm saying here. I'm just kind of giving you the general idea. Like, for instance, food isn't just generated, in a region, but you can food is actually sent from places where there's a glut to places where there's more demand. And so, in theory, even if you don't have a lot of farming efficiency in a given province, if you've built up a lot of demand for food, then you can actually import it from outside. But I don't want to get too much into that stuff. Instead, let's go ahead and go over some of the other concepts in the game that have been revised. So, when you have more productive citizens, you're able to get more money, which you can use for other more enlightened activities. And so, for instance, we have an education system which allows you to improve the education of your people through giving endowments to your universities and building new universities. And by doing so, you increase the rate at which you gain ideas and technology, as well as your ability to spread institutions. And it also retains military experience much better when your generals are literate and stuff, and general staffs. And also, when you're more developed and you have a strong manufacturing industries, when you produce a lot of luxury goods per capita, you get special bonuses too, and you get bonuses for developments. Yeah, so a lot of benefits to being developed. And we also have a new stability system. So you'll notice the stability button has been intentionally broken, because it was kind of lame that when you had -3 stability, you could instantaneously spend monarch mana and suddenly have perfect stability again. That kind of really took the challenge away from dealing with times of trouble in your country. And so now, the way it works is that you actually accumulate points, stability points, and then once you reach a threshold, you then you then gain a stability. And the higher, the higher your stability it is, the higher the next threshold. And so it's actually pretty difficult to get to 3 stability. And stability is actually, in a lot of the new mechanics, it's used as a kind of currency. So when you're really stable, you can use, you're not really using stability, but what you're doing is you can take daring actions like revoking privileges from estates or trying to weed out corruption. And in effect, what you would do is you'd be spending stability or taking a risk that you could lose stability in order to purify your society or to enact reforms and things like that. So stability is much, much, much more valuable than it was before. And there's various different ways that you can improve it. You can take policies which improve stability, but give you some negatives. You can intentionally hand out privileges and effectively corrupt your government in order to get short-term bursts to stability, right? It's kind of like what happened often when an illegitimate leader came to power. They would often, open up the treasuries and give out titles and money and such in order to buy people's favor. And that's a way that you could improve stability if you didn't want to be in the danger zone. Let's see. Now, another important feature, actually probably one of the biggest features in 2.0 is we have completely and utterly ripped out the old estates system. And so there's nothing left of Paradox's estate system beyond simply the interface. And what we did is we completely reprogrammed it and made it much more sophisticated and much more interesting, in my opinion, and detailed. And the idea is that in your society, there is a dominant power in each province, right? So in a new estate system, there is no such thing as a province which does not have an estate in it. And we've integrated this new concept with autonomy. And the idea is a province's autonomy level represents the distribution of power between the states and the estate, or rather the crown and the estate in that province. So in Granada, the crown controls almost all of the province because autonomy is really low. And so the bourgeoisie have only a little bit of power in this province. And you can see here, same thing with lesser nobles. And so you can see here that in Granada, because it's a small country that is highly centralized, the state is able to exert a high amount of influence over what happens in the country. And then the bourgeoisie and the lesser nobles, they have some say, but they're kind of second fiddle. And the idea is that the burghers and lesser nobles, all your estates, they don't just exist anymore to be milked from time to time. They're not just some instrument that you use to expand your power. Estates now actually have their own interests and will push their own agendas and will attempt to expand their own power inside of your country. The burghers will try to build cities where there are nobles so that they can take control of the province. The lesser nobles will try to improve their power bases or spur you to war to take nearby provinces. And so they all have their own agendas, and they'll come to you on a regular basis and try to get you to do what they want. In addition to that, they will attempt to gain privileges in your society as well. And there are many, many different types of privileges they can request or that you can give them. And so you can see here, you can give the burghers token honorary noble titles. And what that does is it gives you a short-term burst of loyalty along with some stability. And in exchange, they get special benefits and become more powerful, and So you can see here it also corrupts your state too. And I'll explain how corruption works better a little bit later. And so they'll be trying to accumulate these special privileges to advantage themselves at the cost of basically the state's, the crown's power. And the states can be super handy in a pinch. There's a wide range. So these are other ways that you can improve. You can improve loyalty with the bourgeoisie. You can see that offering favors makes them happy, so it gives you more stability points. And you can see here, with the lesser nobles, they have their own special list of favors. You can demand support. So see, these give different advantages, and all of this is scaled, by the way. All of these favors and all of these privileges and all of these demands that you can make are all scaled to the power and influence of the actual estate, right? So you can see if lesser nobles were a lot more powerful, all of these benefits would be substantially more powerful as well. And you can see here that each estate is like a little shadow government that exists in your country. So you can see they actually have their own treasuries too. So in the case of the, actually, you know what, let's go to a country with some more interesting distributions of estates. Granada is almost completely controlled by the crown, so they're kind of boring example. Let's look at France. So you can see here in France, the crown is much, the state is much weaker than the various types of estates. And part of the reason is because it's so spread out, right? Autonomy is pushed through the roof, in a lot of their provinces. And so in a province like this, which is controlled by the greater nobles, 100% of all of the tax revenue that would normally go to the state is instead going to the greater nobles, right? And you can see the greater nobles control 48% of the country. That's how powerful their influence is. Don't look at this right here. This is kind of broken. But, right, so the greater nobles are, almost 3 times more powerful than you, the crown, which means they're getting more income than you, which means, they have a lot of leverage against you. So you can see, France's actual income is pretty crappy. It's actually, as the game goes on, they're just coming out of a war, so they're kind of hurting right now. But their income will be about 12 in a couple of years, which isn't a whole lot, because you can see that even near home, the greater nobles are exerting a lot of influence, and so at 56.7%, 56.7% of the resources of the province are going to the greater nobles, and the rest is going to you. And so you can see the greater nobles in France are immensely powerful. Their annual income is 91.7 ducats. They have a private army all their own, which they can either raise against you when you piss them off, or you can raise when you go to war. So if you have a good relationship with the greater nobles, you can, actually, let's go to war right now. You can go ahead. I need a diplomat. Where's diplomat? Probably covert action. Yeah. So you can see that if we were to go to war on, let's see. Oh, we actually have a cousin. You can see, in addition to the crown's army, we could then request offensive war support, and then we could, at a cost of loyalty, raise some of their levies. So if we wanted full support, and we could also then they're basically raising right now. And then if we the lesser nobles are a lot smaller, so let's say we get some support from them. They provide 2. Burghers don't like going to war, but they can give financial support and logistical support and war relief. So even though it appears we only have 9 soldiers, if we give it a little while, you can see all of our various levies have been raised. There's looting policy. Oh, and the cavalry is being raised. That's good enough. You can see everyone's swooping in and joining. So you can see we also have, you know, lesser noble levies, greater noble levies. So now we have a formidable army by calling upon the various nobility. And then once the war is over, all the soldiers then go back to their respective estates. And then you lose more loyalty if some of those troops don't make it home. So now let's go ahead and unconditionally surrender because we misclicked. Surrendering. Is there a reason why this is not ending? I guess you can't unconditionally surrender yet. That's a little bit annoying. There, okay. There. Okay. So now the estate soldiers return. And then we're back with just our crown troops. So in decentralized countries and large empires that you can't control very well, your estates tend to be substantially stronger compared to the power of the crown, of the centralized government. Right? Oftentimes what you'll have is strong estates tending to steer your policy and boss you around and things like that. And so part of the objective of the game is not just painting the colors all over the continent and the world, but also to try to assert internal control and internal stability and gradually wrest control away from the various estates and more toward the power of the crown, of the centralized government. And there's lots of ways to do that, right? You can revoke privileges. So for instance, every estate starts out with privileges at game start, and so you can gradually peel them back. And so you can see that if I revoke significant tax exemptions, it improves my taxes because the greater nobles in all the provinces have special tax favors, which gives them more money and takes money away from the crown. It costs, diplomacy and administrative points to do this, and it'll make me better in the long run removing this privilege, but it'll give me negative stability growth. It'll reduce corruption, and it'll also cause a stability hit more than likely because, it causes, anytime you restructure society and possibly piss off your estates, it causes stability damage. Alright, so you can see the greater nobles react to the fact that I revoked some of their privileges, and it will possibly do a lot of stability damage, and it did. And so this is what I mean by using stability as a kind of currency, right? Once you've improved the stability of your country, you can then try to reform and gain more control over your country internally. And of course, every country has every estate has their own privileges that they start out with. And of course, conversely, when you're in a pinch, you can always give out a privilege. if, for instance, you go to war and you really, really, really need the help of your greater nobles and you don't have a lot of loyalty, then, hey, you can go ahead and give back significant tax exemptions, or what have you, and then that'll allow you to call on them for favors. Loyalty, by the way, doesn't move toward an equilibrium anymore, so you can't just wait for it to get better and then milk your estates. You actually have to do stuff for them in order for them to like you, and that's not always an easy thing to do. Okay, so on to the concept of corruption. Corruption has been changed so that it no longer, I guess it's kind of a bad example because I'm not very far in the game at the moment, but corruption is a permanent feature of the game. You will pretty much never ever get it to 0, nor should you really try because it's kind of impractical. Corruption is something that you're always getting, right? So you can see here, even though we don't have localizations, the privileges that we've given out to the greater nobles is giving us plus 0.38 corruption annually, and there's a few other things that give us corruption too. And so corruption will always be ticking up from various sources, but the higher corruption goes, the more negative annual corruption you get until eventually you come to an equilibrium. So if you give out like 10 privileges or something like that, that'll make you settle at 10 corruption. That'll be the equilibrium point, and then it'll sit there until it gets disturbed. If you give out more privileges, it moves the equilibrium up, and so you have more corruption in society. It can be tempting when you're in trouble to basically give out privileges so that you can get more stability and get more short-term loyalty, but in the long term, over 50 years, over 100 years, that corruption will begin to dig into the effectiveness of the central government. And not to mention, when corruption gets really high, you'll start getting unrest events and lots of other problems like that. So that's the way corruption works. You'll never practically get rid of it entirely. And if your estates are completely without any privileges, they'll be more apt to come to you wanting them. And so it's not really a viable gameplay strategy to always just try to bring corruption to 0 because it becomes cost prohibitive. In real life, there's not even any society on Earth which is completely and utterly uncorrupt. And during this era, this was even more true. Let's see. So other mechanics. What do we got around here? Let's go over the various estates. How about that? So we have lots of different types of estates in game, and you don't get to choose where they go, right? So remember, in vanilla, you would normally click on a province, and you're like, oh, look, it's a completely rural province. Why don't I put the burgers there? You know, it didn't really make sense because you could put different estates wherever you wanted, pretty much without much logic being behind it. But the idea now is that at game start, estates are assigned everywhere in the world to every province based on the power structure and economic activity of that particular province. So for instance, when we go to Oxford, we could see that rural population and rural infrastructure dominates the province, right? So the burgers don't live there, right? In fact, actually, if we open up, let's see if I can get the save file. So if we, let's see, at Oxford 237, so let's see, you can see the total weight of burgers in this province, or city dwellers, is only a value of 5. what the total weight of the greater nobles in the province is 53. So basically the greater nobles are 10 times more powerful than the city folk that are in the province, and so naturally the nobles are the ones that dominate the province. But if I were to build up a city here, and then my city, the weight of the city folk were to exceed the weight of the rural greater nobles, who are living on farms and plantations and such, then the province would flip to burghers controlled after a bit of a struggle. And so if we look around, we can see that England is almost entirely made of rural estates of one kind or another. You can see the burghers are here because there's enough power in the city for them to have control. Here's what the composition of England looks like. It's only 3% burghers, so burghers have almost no power in England. You have freeholders, which are people who live in the rural countryside on farms, but are not subject to feudalism, so like your yeomen and things like that. 18% in England is greater noble, and greater nobles represent powerful nobles who either have a lot of privileges or a lot like dukes and things like that, and higher ranking nobles. And then lesser nobles are your barons and knights and things like that. And that's one of the pretty much the biggest landed estate, which is in England. And then the crown itself controls 39% of the power in the country. So England has a pretty strong central government. And you can see their autonomy in various places is not super high, so that kind of explains why the crown has pretty good control. Go to France on the other side, on the other hand, and you can see, even though their burghers are a bit more powerful, there are pretty much no freeholders whatsoever, and the greater nobles are extremely powerful. And greater nobles generate way more base autonomy than many of the other estates, and so what that means is that the greater nobles tend to be significantly more powerful than the other estates, and so they tend to be quite a force to be reckoned with. The good news is if they're on your side, then you get to tap into their power and their influence. But ideally, as the game goes on, you want to try and limit the power of the greater nobles so that the state has more control, because your states aren't always cooperative, and sure, while they do cooperate, your country could be almost unstoppable, but that power is much more concisely used when it's in the crown's hands. And you can see in places like Florence, which is a merchant republic, you can see the burghers pretty much dominate the entire country, and there's a factional system. Whoops, that is not the factional system. There's a factional system too, in which basically in merchant republics you have influence with what am I trying to say? The influence is based on how powerful that faction is. So in Florence, because there's tons and tons and tons of artisans there, the artisans are powerful, and they end up giving you a special bonus. So you have a strong artisan faction, and they also have aristocrats and traders, but they're substantially weaker based on their power base, and so you get a smaller bonus. So to go over freeholders a bit more, I'm still working on freeholders, so not quite done. Freeholders don't exist in many places around game start, but obviously when you get around to the period of revolutionary republics, you'll have much more of them. And freeholders, you'll notice you can't really do much with them. You can't you can't really negotiate with them and get them to give you stuff the way that greater nobles do. But freeholders tend to be really good for the economy because they have a lot of motivation to improve their condition by improving their land and improving, the productivity of their farming and things like that. At game start, most of the freeholders in Europe are up in Scandinavia, but otherwise you don't find them in too many places. We also have the tribal estates, which existed in the previous game in vanilla, but will behave very, very, very differently than they did in the previous game. So tribes basically are horrible at economic growth, but all of the wealth that they produce goes straight into their ability to field armies. And so what that means is that tribal estates are really, 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 really bad long term because you have no economic growth. But for their size, they have tremendous armies that you can call on if you're on their good side. Tons of cavalry for warfare. And I've just started working on them too not too long ago, so they've got a little ways to go still. So, in addition, we've made a lot of AI improvements, as I mentioned earlier. And of course, we've had to teach the AI to use the various different types of pop mechanisms. And I think that pretty much covers all of the major features. There is also a new. Let's see if I find a good example. There's a good example here in Aragon of the new communication efficiency system. And so the idea is that the further a province is from your capital, right, the harder it is to communicate with them, and so the higher that province's autonomy tends to go, right? Because if you have a hard time communicating with your nobles on Sardinia, then they're able to exert more of their own autonomy and control more of their own affairs, right? And so with the new communication efficiency system, what happens is the time it takes to get to a given province is calculated, and then however long it takes to get there determines how bad or good communication efficiency is. And so the way it works is the capital sends out runners in every direction, and they will always try to find the fastest path. And certain terrains are easier to travel over, like flat land is easier to travel through than woods or hills. And so if you were trying to get to Tarazona, the runner would go this way through Tarragona and Zaragoza because that's the fastest route, and then they would end up there. And then that would determine the communication efficiency. Having extra roads and better roads improves the rate at which people can run there. And you can actually build roads now using manpower in addition to ducats. And so you can see here there's a little road menu, and you can contribute manpower to the effort. We're actually out of manpower, so we can't contribute that much. But you can spend up to 75% of the cost. You can also dip into local wealth, but we don't have enough here to do that. And so you can build roads that way using a mix of manpower, local wealth, and ducats. In addition to roads improving movement, having better ports can better enable you to improve your communication efficiency in far-flung islands or on overseas territories. And so what happens there is that runners head out from the capital, they jump onto the nearest ship at the nearest port, and then they what they'll try to do is they'll try to jump from port to port. Having more ports along the way will speed up their trip to wherever they're going. And so what's happening here is that you have a runner leaving the capital in Barcelona and arriving at Mallorca, and then they take another ship over the Castadu. And then from there, the runner goes to the other parts of Sardinia. And you can see along the way, right, efficiency is getting worse and worse as it takes longer and longer to get there until, right, you can see this is just about the worst. You can see there's not a sufficiently powerful enough port for a ship to go straight there, so instead the runner has to go from here to here and to here. And so by improving your roads and your port infrastructure, you can improve the autonomy of your country or empire and wrest more control away from the estates and toward the crown. Eventually, when your nation becomes centralized enough, or when you've reduced autonomy enough and there's enough power in the hands of the crown or the central government, new estates will appear for the central government, like the military, right, the bureaucracy, trade companies, things of that nature. Those won't be in release, but they will be worked on post-release. And so eventually you'll have a military estate that you can invest money into and get better discipline and better morale and found, military academies and stuff like that to improve your military tradition. So that's all pending in the future. Okay, so before I wrap this video up, I wanted to mention that it can appear to be overwhelming with me talking about all of these fine details and everything and all of these intricate systems. But the great part about MNT 2.0 is that it has a lot of what teammate Desumont called deep mechanics, in which you don't really actually need to understand the rules all that much in order to play the game. The idea is that you play the way you want to play, and then the game adapts around you, right? There's no right or wrong way to play. If you wanted to be super duper military oriented, you would still have economic growth and stuff like that. The population would still grow, and the population would respond to the strain that you generate via war exhaustion and province drama and things like that. And so if you wanted to get a finer understanding of the mechanics, you can dig deeper. But just to play the game, you don't need to necessarily know that much more than what you would with Europa Universalis 4 vanilla. And so you learn kind of some of the basic new concepts, but you play the game pretty much the same way as before, and you would see the world change and evolve in intricate ways due to these deep mechanics. And so the ultimate objective isn't necessarily to make the game super more complicated. It's not like Europa Universalis vanilla, where every single time there's a DLC, there's a new button you need to learn how to click. MNT 2.0 isn't God King Simulator, where nothing happens unless you click a button and spend some mana, right? So things happen in your economy and with your estates and all of that. That all happens on its own, and it reacts to how you play, as opposed to the other way around. And so don't worry yourself with thinking that the game is going to be so complicated that you need to spend 2 years to learn how to play. My suspicion is you could jump straight in and be able to basically play a normal game effectively without sucking too hard. And it's one of those easy to learn, hard to master type of things. So think of it more like chess, right? Another really cool thing about MNT 2.0 that some of the beta testers have mentioned is that it feels like there is a lot less. If you want to try and play really well and succeed, and you're kind of a power gamer type, in previous versions of MNT and in vanilla, at least I know it felt this way for me. I always felt like I was under a lot of pressure to conquer as much as I could, as fast as I could, because that was really the only metric of your success, right? There's no point in taking it slow because you cap out on economic factors pretty quickly, and so the only metric of success was to paint as much of the map as possible in your colors. Well, with MNT 2.0, we have a lot of counter inertia to empire building. And not just that, but there are many different ways to improve the quality and caliber of your country. And oftentimes going to war and conquering lots of land can be counterproductive to that purpose. And so you actually have to be a lot more discreet about what you do, and you can set your own objectives. So for instance, if you wanted to play as Venice, you don't need to conquer tons and tons of land to be extremely powerful, influential, rich, educated, and the center of culture and technology of Europe. You know, you don't need to conquer tons of land to necessarily be great. If that's what you want to do, then fine. But, you know, if you do go on the conquering spree, then your society per capita is going to be less developed, and conquering like crazy will have adverse effects. So there's lots of ways that you can play well and get a satisfying experience out of the game without constantly feeling like you have to be at war every second so that you can maximize your success by conquering stuff. Because there are so many more ways to succeed now in the game than just conquering stuff. It's more of one mechanism of many. In addition, you know, I had mentioned earlier that you should often try to gain more control over your estates, right? But so that you have more crown control. But, you know, technically you don't even necessarily need to do that either. Let's say you wanted to play a game where you did conquer a lot, and you wanted to use as much of your forward momentum as possible for the purpose of conquering, and you didn't want to have to, you know, trim down your nobles. Well, that's fine. If you wanted to, you could just play a game where you let your estates have lots of power, but then you just try to manage your relationship with them as deftly as possible, so that you can use them as a mechanism of conquest and of improving your country, because that's perfectly plausible too. Even if you have a crappy army and huge estates, you can do lots of conquering because they have formidable armies themselves. And so if you want to play it that way, that's just as legitimate. There's no right or wrong way to play necessarily, only the objectives you create for yourself. So if you want to play a game as Hungary where you develop you develop what you see here as much as possible and become a urban industrial center and technological center of Europe, you can play that way and just do that and keep your neighbors in check. Or you could also go on a conquering rampage if that's your objective as well. But if you go on the conquering rampage, then you'll be a big empire, but you won't be as advanced and you won't be as tall per se, right? So all of your objectives are up to you, and there's no right or wrong way to play. And I've found that as I just play test games, I feel like I can take my time more, and I feel like I'm not under as much pressure to constantly be on the rise and conquering the crap out of it. And it's more of a relaxing, more satisfying experience for me personally. So just my take, and I'm sure a lot of you will feel the same way when at last you get to play. Okay, so a few more fun things. I don't think I've ever shown you guys population growth in action. That's because obviously you'd have to sit around for a super long time, because pop growth takes a while in game terms. But let me show you a little developers tool that I made, which is called a time lapse, where you can actually speed up time as far as the population growth and wealth growth algorithms are concerned. Before we do that, let's take a look at Granada. You can see, let's see, population data. You can see that rural population is only one. So I should kind of remove percentage there, remove the decimals over. But anyway, should be 100% it has 100% saturation. It can go to 150% saturation. That's where it gets really crowded. And then urban saturation is about 98% saturation. In Elmira, we can see we have roughly the same. Now we're going to go ahead and speed time up here. Yeah, so let's go ahead and get people to breed. We'll do a 30-year time lapse. And so what that means is the population events which are responsible for growth will go 30 times faster. In case you're wondering, actually, let me see if... Yeah, you can see... So for instance, here's the population event just for pop growth. You can see it's a lot goes into all this. A lot of this is summarized by scripted effects, so this is actually kind of a small version. But there's a lot that goes into pop growth, and that basically what happens is all of those algorithms fire 365 times more frequently than they would otherwise when I speed it up, and it goes for the equivalent of 30 years. So let's go ahead and let it go. Let it go, let it go. And you can see it's huffing and puffing a little bit just because there's a lot of calculations happening. So originally, Granada hasn't grown yet. Elmira hasn't grown yet. I got some stability because it thinks that time is going faster. Okay, so you see, boop. Elmira got a rural population. I think we're about 10 years in or something. Oh, okay, and Granada, the city of Granada grew a bit. All right, we have an extra urban population. Oh, and Elmira grew another, so it's up to 14. This is happening all over the world, by the way, so everything's growing everywhere at 365%. There, we got another stability. Okay, Elmira grew another, Granada grew another. And time lapse is complete. So we can take a look here and see that we're a bit more saturated than before, right? So what that means is the more saturated you become, the slower growth, the more growth slows down for the two respective populations. And so with rural saturation, you need to bring more land under cultivation to bring that down. That just takes time. You don't have too much control over that. With urban saturation, though, you do have some control. So if I wanted to reduce urban saturation and increase growth, I would want to build another urban building. See, so you see how this city hall increases urban gravity? What urban gravity means is it's extra work opportunity, right? So it'll draw more people to, it'll basically reduce urban saturation and make growth accelerate. The other aspect of growth, though, is how much extra food there is. And I don't think I have any metrics for that put in yet. No, I don't. But if there's not a lot of extra food, then that slows down city growth significantly as well. So yeah, that's population growth. So let's say someone were to come in and sack Elmira. Some of the people would be killed off, but interestingly though, the land that's under cultivation doesn't get, nearly as damaged. And so what ends up happening is rural saturation will go down, but the arable land ends up remaining. And so even after people get killed off, they tend to rebound relatively quickly. The downside, though, is if a province is terrorized enough, then what ends up happening is the land that was under cultivation ends up going fallow again, and then you can't recover the population as easily as you did before. Cities are much more vulnerable to sacking and warfare, but the same principle technically applies. So when someone swoops in and sacks the city, it can cause some significant casualties in the urban population. But what also happens is wealth is stolen, and then some of the buildings can be destroyed as well. Because remember how I said that ducats are wound up inside of the building? Well, when someone comes and loots your city, they can destroy a building and then suck some of the ducats out and bring it home. And there's a looting system too, which is a lot more sophisticated than the vanilla Paradox version. And so every time you march into a province and attack it and occupy it, you an algorithm runs which calculates how much loot is taken away, and some of that is taken from the local wealth pool, some is taken from the infrastructure, a little bit is even taken from farming efficiency as you cart away livestock and stuff like that. And then at the end of the war, that money ends up going to your treasury and to the troops. And so let's say I'm playing as Granada and I attack Castile and I raid the countryside. At the end of the war, some of that goes back to my treasury, and then some of it goes back to the soldiers. And that ends up being invested into farming efficiency and into the local wealth pool, and some of it ends up in the city. And so the loot system is pretty sophisticated, and you can see more details on that in other videos. You can actually choose at the end of a war how much loot you want to take for yourself and how much you want to give to your soldiers. And the more you give to your soldiers, the more they take back home, and you can actually get some stability from that. But you don't have as much of it going to your treasury. If you take more for yourself, it pisses off the soldiers and also gives a chance to lose stability. You can make a lot of money by raiding and looting. It's a pretty major part of the game. Let me see if there's any famines in effect right now. It's kind of a mess. We gotta do a little cleanup, but okay, cool. So, other things that kill off population. So you can see here in China, you have significant conflict, right? And we can see that because there was actually already, before I, as I was running the game, before I started recording the video, there was warfare happening here. There was a lot of damage done to the provinces here, and then a famine broke out, and that famine will endure for a few years and start to kill off the people that live in the area. And based on the scale of the damage that's done, that generally determines how widespread a famine can be. So if war engulfs an entire country, then a famine could be much, much more deadly. Okay. And there is a lot of intermediate level AIs throughout the game. So there's an AI for each estate in each country. There is an AI for every metropole, is what we call them, which is major cities. And what happens is the super wealthy who live in the metropoles, as they accumulate wealth, they'll look for investment opportunities elsewhere in a nearby area, and they can actually invest their ducats into a location to build new buildings and things like that. Also, the province can invest its own ducats locally to improve the economy there. You can see that happened here in Nankang. And then different estates can spend money to improve the economy too. You see the lesser nobles here saved up enough money to improve the economy. And interestingly, if you play smart with your with your estates, and you don't overtax, you don't call for their help too often, you don't bring them into too many wars, they'll actually take the money that they saved up and they can invest it in the economy. Because remember, these are all ducats that are circulating around and being generated by the economic output of your country. There's tons of other little details here and there. There's mines which produce mined goods. There's tons of different types of trade goods now. So it used to just be that the only kind of trade good that existed was the one in this little box down here. Well, now there's 4 different categories. You have the rural goods, which fill the box right here, and this is what the people in the countryside are producing, right? So wheat, right, olives. But then you also have a second category known as urban goods, and these are the goods which are produced by your urban population. There isn't a very robust industry in Elmira, so they're creating mundane urban goods. This is the lowest quality. Malacca has a decent industry with a workshop, and so they're producing some cloth, which is a mid-tier urban good. And then Granada is an important center of production. They have a pretty good infrastructure for manufacturing urban goods and lots of urban people. So you can see they produce a lot of very valuable, high-quality silk. Right? And there's tons of different types of goods, and each different type of good can give you a different type of countrywide bonus the more you produce per capita. Right? So if you're a small, tall country, right, like Florence, then you end up getting, let's see, where is there? Right, see copious amounts of luxury cloth. They're producing so much luxury cloth that they get a really high bonus for it. But that's divided into their total population, so it's not a gross thing. It can pay to be small and tall because you end up being a very tight, highly developed society which has high per capita productivity per person. And so that allows a country like, Granada or Venice to really hold its own against larger powers. So for instance, at game start, Venice is in a war with Hungary, and you would think, holy crap, Hungary is huge, how could Venice possibly win? But Venice can easily either beat Hungary or fight them to a stalemate. It's perfectly possible because Venice is such a highly developed society. And then we have, mined goods, which I mentioned earlier, and we have a system by which, mines exhaust over time, but they give you a big burst of income. So, for instance, practically half of Sweden's income, is coming from Dalarna, because the mine is so powerful. Some mines are, super valuable. And then you have something called gathered goods, and they are, for instance, furs, pearls, things in distant places which are valuable. You see there's a lot of fur up in Russia. There's even some ivory, presumably from some sea lions and stuff like that. You see there's pearls over on the Arabian Peninsula, right? I would show you plague, but kind of in the crunch for time, and you can look at one of my other videos if you wanna see that. You can see that Cardinal, one of our teammates, has put a lot of geographic features, which make certain locations favorable for cities, bays and confluences and things of that nature. And I guess one last thing that I mentioned in one of my earliest videos, but for any of you that missed it, everything in the game is connected to everything else in the game, in the sense that the economy of Granada, for instance, is actually connected to the economies of nearby countries in a lot of ways. So when you end up hurting, if you're too malicious and you try to aggressively hurt your neighbors and you try to induce famines in their country, and you try to make them vulnerable to plague, and you try to hurt their economy, that actually hurts you in many ways as well. Because I guess in addition to, how do I say this? Previously in Europa Universalis 4 vanilla, things like centers of trade were set from the beginning, right? So if a province had a center of trade, it stayed there the entire game. It didn't matter if you attacked it 50 billion times. But now centers of trade and centers of production and these special modifiers, which give you lots of nice bonuses, they are based on the total value of the industry in your country and nearby. And so what they represent is an aggregation in one place of all the activity that is nearby in the area. And so if I were to go out and I were to damage the trade and the production that exists in other nearby provinces of my enemy, it'll actually end up downgrading the various centers of trade and centers of production in my own province. And not just that, but if I make the nearby provinces vulnerable to famine, that famine can very easily spread right into my country as well and hurt me as well. So you kind of have to be careful. You can't just be vandalistic all the time. Otherwise, you could actually, even though you're getting a lot of loot, from your conquests and such, you could end up actually hurting yourself substantially. And when things like famine sweep through, it can hurt your stability and plunge not just your enemy, but you into a crisis. And I guess I didn't mention it, but centers of trade and production, now they move around based on where the most prosperous locations are. So you can see Seville, for instance, has a minor center of production, a minor center of trade, and that's because it has a lot of economic activity, so a decent amount of production, a decent amount of trade, but it doesn't have as much as Granada. And so if Granada were to decline and Seville was to become more powerful, Seville would hijack the various bonuses and modifiers that exist in Granada, and then Granada would end up downgrading to minor centers of production and trade. And so there's really the economic aspect of this game, the internal politics aspect of MNT 2.0 is going to be substantially more exciting and interesting than what you see in EU4 vanilla. And I'm just in this state of the mod video, I'm only really scratching the surface of the depth of the mod so far. But I think I'm probably going to leave it there at this point. Like I said, we're about 95% done with all the main features. I've really been in polish mode and a lot of debugging mode. I've been rewriting a lot of the code recently, because when I first started on MNT 2.0, I had no experience with coding or computer programming or anything like that. So a lot of my old code was really, really crappy, and I had to redo it. Yeah, that should be about it. So I don't know when I'll release the next video. I know we're going to be at PDocsCon giving a presentation, and so it'd be really cool if any of you guys want to go out there and say hi. Join us in the forums if you haven't already, because everyone's feedback is very valuable and is really great for giving us ideas. So thanks for listening, and until next time. Okay, so bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.